In this video, I want to talk with you about the recent depegging of the euro and the Swiss franc by the Swiss National Bank on January 15th. Now, the peg was at 1.2 euros to the franc. And I'm going to give you a list of reasons why this is relevant to you, why it's going to affect you now or in the near future at the end of this video, so please do watch until the end. A peg is a fixed rate that the central bank will come in and buy in order to support that price point. So if someone came in and was willing to exchange their euros for less than 120, then the Swiss National Bank would come in and buy it back up to that point. There's no central point besides the market where people come to exchange their rates, so they have to go to the open market, the foreign exchange markets, in order to implement their policy. And why would they do this? Why would they initiate this kind of a peg? They did it to protect their export-based economy and to remain competitive in Europe and around the world. The Swiss franc has a long history of being looked upon as a safe haven currency. When there's turmoil in the world, people like to put their money into the Swiss franc as a solid store of value. This has been going on for a long time. It's for many reasons. They have a strong military. They have a trained and an armed population. They have a mountainous nation which hasn't been successfully invaded for God knows how long. They have had a lot of their savings in gold, and they've even, in their history, they backed their currency by gold. And they're a very industrious nation running a trade surplus. And they have a strong history of peace and independence and a good form of democracy, a very direct form, which I'll get into in a little bit. But they've also had a central bank that has been following the Austrian school of economics and has had sound monetary policy. So when the financial crisis of 2008 began, and a lot of countries were dropping their currencies and experiencing a lot of pain, a lot of people sent their money and translated it into Swiss francs and sold other currencies. And then again in 2011, when the euro crisis was in its throes, the Swiss franc was also appreciating greatly, and so they initiated this peg. And we know that the ECB was creating massive amounts of euros to support their member states. And I'm sure you've heard about and read about the different deceit and all of the corruption that went on in bringing a lot of these countries into the EU, making them compliant with the EU treaty, the Maastricht Treaty, etc. Now, the only way that the ECB has been able to stay together is because of the massive money printing programs that they've created to support the sovereign nations. So every time that you create something, more of something, you dilute it, you depreciate its power. So the European countries were getting a competitive edge on the Swiss exporting industry, and so they initiated this peg. So the Swiss National Bank created hundreds of billions of Swiss francs to turn around and use those to buy the euro, thus diluting their own currency, the Swiss franc, in the process. And the more the ECB would print, the European Central Bank would print, and boy, they went through a number of these different quantitative easing money creation programs, the more that the Swiss National Bank would have to print as well. So they ended up with a balance sheet that was expanded somewhere on the order of 450% since around 2007. I'll include a graph here for you to look at later. And then recently, the ECB has been talking about another massive round of quantitative easing of money creation to support their member states. And I believe one of the courts, the European Court of Justice, allowed the the European Treaty to be kind of circumvented, for the ECB to go around the provisions of that treaty to basically just buy sovereign debt directly, which would be just more money, more euro creation, which would force the Swiss National Bank to again create massive amounts of francs in order to turn around and buy the euro. So, realizing that the euro was going to be under renewed pressure, which means all of those euros that they held on their as an asset would depreciate further, they had to call it quits and admit the unsustainability of the peg at 120. They also changed the interest rate that people were charged for holding Swiss francs to negative, so that to kind of incentivize people to get out of the franc. They went from, I believe, 1/4% to negative 3/4%. And the consequences of this, and this is the thing everyone has to understand, is that every action has a reaction. There was massive volatility. Most of this was with direct currency pairs with the Swiss franc, like the Swiss franc and the euro, obviously, and the Swiss franc and the dollar, Swiss franc and the Japanese yen and others. But it also spread to all other asset classes. There was just massive volatility. The intraday move was something like 30 to 40%. And this is something, somebody told me it was like a 50 sigma move, which is statistically supposed to be impossible. But, you know, we're not living in the world of reality. We're living in the creation, the fantasy land of the central planners, at least at this point in time. It will change. But leveraged players in the market, a lot of them were just absolutely wiped out. There's a number of many individual bankruptcies, but also corporations and businesses and brokerages that are just completely out of business. They've been wiped out. I've explained in some other videos how people can use a small amount of capital to control a much larger amount of funds and buy or sell currencies on the market. So with, say, $200, you could control $10,000 worth of Swiss francs. And people who had positioned themselves wrongly in the market before this announcement by the Swiss National Bank were just on the wrong side of the market and caught with their pants down and wiped out. So there's been a lot of restructuring of businesses as well in Europe, and particularly in Switzerland. Some of them were only profitable because of that peg, so they're having to either declare bankruptcy or look for some other way to restructure their business. And although I'm very happy to see some economic sanity coming out of Europe and see that the laws of mathematics and economics forced the Swiss National Bank to make this call, it's the disruptions, it's the reshuffling, the restructuring of the economy, the businesses, the jobs, the individuals, and that's where the pain is. And the pain, that restructuring, that reshuffling, is much more severe being done now than if it would have been if the Swiss franc would have been allowed to rise many years ago. So one of the things that I believe brought this whole depegging to the fore was a referendum that was a referendum to amend the Swiss constitution that was voted on at the end of November, called the Save Our Swiss Gold Initiative. And this would have required the Swiss National Bank to again back their currency, buy gold somewhere in the order of 20%. And the Swiss National Bank had been selling a lot of their gold. And because they were expanding their balance sheet with so many euros to keep the peg, the ratio of Swiss francs to gold was depreciating with the same intensity. The referendum failed, but it did bring the attention to the public and to the world the negative ramifications of this peg and the manipulation by the central planners in Switzerland and in Europe. And this is another peg. This is another this prop that has been taken away from the ECB as well, because it was not just the ECB has been having these rounds of money printing, but they're one central bank. But they also had the Swiss National Bank behind them with that peg to help support their economies. and their programs. So why is this important to you? Well, this is the list that I promised you at the beginning of this video. The first point that I would say is that the central bankers in Switzerland, the Swiss National Bank, they completely blindsided not only the people of Switzerland, but the world. They were singing one tune one day, and from one day to the next, they were just about face. They completely turned around. So don't expect any kind of a warning when they reset or they change their tune. The second point I would make is that businesses, investors, banks, insurance companies, pension funds, etc., they use mathematical and statistical models to evaluate investments and business decisions. And these are all based on currencies. And these currencies have no solid, tangible base themselves, no form of discipline to them. So these models are going to fail. So we're going to see volatility across all sorts of asset classes. And the volatility and these changes will change the value of currencies and the assets that you hold, and ultimately what you are, quote unquote, worth. I mean, what do you work for? You work for currencies so you can turn around and spend that on your needs or your wants, right? So we're witnessing the culmination of all the negative and wrong choices made by central planners. It's all going to unfold right now. And faith and confidence in the central planners of the world is what has sustained the global economy since the financial crisis of 2008. But now it's being openly questioned. People are talking about the sustainability of their programs finally. And faith and confidence are a real tricky thing. It's, it takes a long time to build it up, but then it can be lost like that in a moment. So anyway, I guess the main thing is you're not going to get any warning. It's time to be prepared. There is a currency war afoot. It's happening across the world right now. And before it's over, gold and silver will have their own 50 Sigma event. So get prepared. You'll find some links to articles on my website or at the bottom of this post. Check it out. Thanks.